Welcome to Sinister Truths, the channel where dark history, hidden stories, and unsettling realities come to light. Before we begin, let us know in the comments which country you're watching from and what time of day it is for you. And make sure to subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss a chilling story. The room smelled of old money, polished wood, leather, dust that had settled for decades without ever being disturbed by real work. Chandeliers hung like frozen suns, their lights soft but merciless, exposing everything and forgiving nothing. Men filled the velvet chairs in careful silence, not because they were polite, but because silence was power here. Voices were currency, attention was a weapon, and tonight both were being spent deliberately. She stood at the center of the room, no chains, no dramatic display. That was what unsettled them most. She wore a simple dress, pale in color, clean, unadorned. Her hands were folded loosely in front of her, her posture calm, almost relaxed. Anyone expecting fear would have been disappointed. Anyone hoping for defiance would have missed it too. Her face revealed neither. She looked neither broken nor hopeful. She looked observant. The auctioneer cleared his throat, though no one had asked him to. He was nervous. He always was when the buyers were this important. 11 men sat before him. Industrial magnates, political financiers, heirs whose names alone could shake markets. Their faces were known to the world, though rarely seen together like this. This gathering was not legal, nor was it meant to be remembered. It would dissolve into rumor by morning, and rumor itself would soon be buried under money. "She is unregistered," the auctioneer began, reading from a tablet he didn't fully understand. "No existing claims, educated, multilingual, compliant." That last word lingered too long in the air. She did not react. She had learned years ago that reactions were invitations. If you gave people a flicker of emotion, they would grab it, twist it, own it. So she gave them nothing. Her eyes moved slowly, carefully, memorizing. The man in the third seat drummed his fingers in patterns, anxiety disguised as impatience. The one near the aisle leaned back too comfortably, already imagining ownership. Two of them avoided looking at her altogether, as if eye contact might implicate them in something they refused to name. The bidding began quietly. Numbers were exchanged like private jokes. Large ones, absurd ones, enough to fund hospitals, buy islands, erase scandals. Each raise was made with casual precision, as though they were not bidding on a human being but on art, or racehorses, or silence. The auctioneer's voice grew steadier as the numbers climbed. Money always soothed people like him. She noticed the pauses, who hesitated, who smiled, who watched the others more than he watched her. When the bidding reached a point that would have stunned anyone outside the room, one man lifted his hand, not to bid but to speak. "We should be practical," he said smoothly. "Joint acquisition." A ripple moved through the room, not surprise. Consideration. Another man chuckled. 11 shares then? "Equal access," the first replied. "Equal cost." No one asked her opinion. The auctioneer swallowed, then nodded quickly. He knew better than to resist consensus when it came wrapped in wealth. Papers would be adjusted, terms would be drafted, the rules would be theirs. "Agreed," another voice said. One by one heads inclined. A deal formed itself with almost elegant ease. She lowered her gaze at just the right moment, not in submission but in calculation. This was better than she had hoped. 11 instead of 1. 11 doors instead of a single locked room. 11 egos instead of one shadow. The hammer fell. Sold. Applause did not follow. Applause was for public victories. This was private. 2 attendants approached her, careful, respectful in the way people are when they fear lawsuits more than morality. One gestured toward the exit. She walked without resistance. Her steps were measured, unhurried. If anyone noticed that her breathing remained calm, they said nothing. As she passed the buyers, she felt their attention like heat against her skin. Appraisal, curiosity, ownership forming in their minds lick. E-ink spreading in water. One of them leaned forward slightly, as if to speak, then stopped himself. She wondered if he sensed something, not danger exactly, but misalignment, like a clock that ticks a fraction too slowly to trust. The car waiting outside was black, silent, armored. The city beyond the gates glittered with ordinary life. Restaurants, traffic, people laughing at things that mattered to them. It all looked unreal, like a painting she had seen long ago. She wondered briefly whether she would miss it. The car, she sat alone. No guards, no restraints. They believed she had nowhere to go. That belief was their first mistake. As the engine hummed to life, she allowed herself one small breath that was almost a smile. Almost. She thought of the years that had led here, of documents copied and hidden, of names traced across shell companies and foreign accounts, of nights spent listening, pretending, learning how power spoke when it thought no one dangerous was nearby. She thought of the moment she had realized that justice, as defined by courts and laws, was not built for people like her, or people like the ones who had destroyed everything she once had. So she had built something else. The estate loomed on the horizon like a monument to excess. High walls, cameras, gates that opened without sound. Inside, marble floors reflected light like still water. The attendants guided her through corridors that smelled faintly of disinfectant and perfume, past doors that were locked not for safety but for control. They showed her a room, large, beautiful, empty. "The rules will be explained," one attendant said. "Meals will be provided. You will be expected to be available." She nodded once. When the door closed, the lock clicked softly. The sound was final. That was what they believed. She sat on the edge of the bed and listened. The house had a rhythm. Ventilation systems, footsteps at a distance, the faint echo of voices somewhere below, already arguing about schedules, privileges, arrangements. She lay back and stared at the ceiling. 11 men believed they had purchased something to satisfy themselves, something silent, something controllable, something that would absorb their desires and leave no mark. They did not know they had invited a mirror into their lives, one that would show them exactly who they were and then break them with the reflection. In the quiet of that room, with the house settling around her like a sleeping beast, she whispered nothing. There was no prayer left in her, no plea, only patience. The game had begun. Morning arrived without sunlight. The windows in her room were real but treated, designed to let in brightness without offering a view. Day and night were suggestions here, controlled by schedules and sensors rather than the sky. When she woke, it was not to an alarm but to the soft click of the door unlocking, then relocking, a reminder that even rest was monitored. She sat up slowly, listening. The house had changed overnight. The quiet tension of the previous evening had hardened into something more complex. Ownership had begun to settle into routine. A tray appeared an hour later, delivered by a woman who kept her eyes down and her steps light, as though sound itself could be punished. Breakfast was arranged carefully, fruit cut with precision, tea steeped to perfection, no poison, no message, nothing dramatic. Control here was subtle. They didn't need threats when comfort did the work for them. She ate just enough. She had learned long ago not to refuse what was given unless refusal served a purpose. Compliance, when chosen rather than forced, could be a mask as effective as defiance. By mid-morning the rules arrived. They were not delivered as a list but as an orientation, spoken by a man who introduced himself as the house manager. He wore an expensive suit and an expression that suggested he believed himself neutral, professional, untouched by what the house truly was. He explained. Schedules, privacy zones, restricted areas. He explained expectations using language polished until it sounded almost reasonable. "You are not to leave the estate," he said calmly. "You will be notified in advance of appointments. Your comfort will be prioritized." She nodded. "There are cameras in the public corridors," he continued. "None in your room or the private suites." Another nod. "The masters value discretion." She looked at him then, really looked. He flinched before he could stop himself. "I value it too," she said softly. The man cleared his throat and concluded the briefing quickly. When he left, the door did not lock immediately. A pause, a test. She remained still until it closed. The House of 11, as it would soon come to be known in her thoughts, was a place designed to impress and intimidate in equal measure. Each wing reflected the tastes of its occupants. One favored minimalist steel and glass, everything sharp lines and cold light. Another was decorated like a museum. Walls crowded with art acquired less for love than for value. A third wing felt almost domestic. Plush couches, family photographs carefully placed to suggest warmth, normalcy, virtue. She moved through these spaces escorted but attentive. Every hallway was a sentence, every room a confession. The men arrived in staggered intervals throughout the day, never all at once. They did not want witnesses to one another's behavior. Not yet. The first she met was the one who had proposed joint ownership at the auction. He was courteous, controlled, proud of his self-restraint. He spoke to her as though she were an intelligent investment, something rare and therefore worthy of maintenance. "You will find this arrangement mutually beneficial," he said, offering a smile that never touched his eyes. "Stability has its advantages." She met his gaze, letting silence stretch just long enough to unsettle him. "Stability is underrated," she replied. He left satisfied, believing he had set the tone. The second was younger, restless, always glancing at his phone even when it was face down on the table. He asked her questions about her education, her interests, as though curiosity alone absolved him of guilt. She answered selectively, offering truths stripped of context. People rarely noticed when truth was incomplete. By evening, she had met 6 of them. Each interaction was brief, controlled, different in texture but identical in assumption. None of them considered the possibility that she was listening more closely than they were speaking. None noticed how she adjusted her posture, her expression, just slightly, to reflect what each wanted to see. She had learned mirroring years ago, had practiced it in places far less luxurious than this. The 7th arrived late, already irritated by something unrelated. He paced as he spoke, complaining about rivals, regulators, the incompetence of people who were not him. He spoke freely, recklessly, because he believed the room itself was loyal. She filed away names, phrases, half-finished thoughts. Anger made people generous with information. That night, alone again, she replayed the day like a map unfolding. She placed each man in his mental room, connected threads between them. 2 were competitors pretending otherwise. 1 was dependent on another's silence. 1 was terrified of scandal. 1 was already cracking under pressure. They thought they had bought compliance. What they had actually purchased was attention. Days passed. A rhythm formed. She was given clothes chosen to flatter without empowering. She was given freedom within boundaries that felt generous only if you ignored the walls. She was allowed books, carefully selected, nothing recent, nothing political. She read them anyway, marking passages in her mind, training patience. The house staff avoided her when they could, but not all of them. 1 maid lingered once, hesitating near the door. "They watch everything," the maid whispered, barely audible. "I know," she replied. The maid nodded, relief flickering across her face, as though being understood was a kind of rescue. She left quickly after that, but something had shifted. Even in places like this, cracks existed. The 8th master arrived with gifts, jewelry, silk, things meant to impress or intimidate. He spoke little, preferring observation, his eyes sharp and calculating. She recognized him as the most dangerous kind, not cruel for pleasure, but for efficiency. He would be the hardest to unbalance. The 9th never met her alone. He always insisted on staff present, witnesses arranged like shields. His fear was almost visible, radiating from him in careful smiles and formal language. He had secrets that screamed to be discovered. The 10th treated her with exaggerated kindness, as though kindness could erase context. He spoke of charity work, of foundations and public service. He wanted to be admired, not just obeyed. She gave him exactly enough admiration to make him careless. The 11th did not arrive at all. Days went by before she realized his absence was deliberate. He was watching from a distance, gathering reports, studying patterns. He was patient. That made him interesting. One afternoon, during a rare moment alone in a common corridor, she noticed a door left slightly ajar. Inside was a study, walls lined with screens, security feeds, financial dashboards, a map of the estate rendered in precise detail. She did not enter. She did not even slow her pace. She simply noted it, fixed it in memory. There would be time. At night she dreamed less than she used to. Dreams were luxuries. Instead she planned. She refined timelines. She imagined conversations that had not yet happened, arguments that could be nudged into existence, with a sentence placed just right. She began to ask questions. Small ones, harmless ones, questions about preferences, routines, opinions. She framed them as curiosity, as a desire to please. Men like these underestimated curiosity when it came from someone they believed beneath them. Answers accumulated. She learned who trusted whom and why. She learned who was lying to the others, and who was lying to himself. She learned which accounts were vulnerable, which alliances were brittle, which egos were starving. One evening, as she was escorted back to her room, the house manager stopped her. "You are adjusting well," he said. She smiled faintly. "People adapt when they must." He hesitated, then added, "The masters appreciate discretion." "So do I," she said again, and this time the words carried weight he could not quite explain. When the door closed behind her, she stood still for a long moment, listening to the locks engage. She placed her palm against the cool surface and breathed steadily. They believed the house belonged to them. They did not yet understand that houses, like systems, could be turned against their owners, not by force, but by precision. The House of 11 was no longer just a prison. It was a laboratory. And she was done observing. The first fracture appeared so quietly that no one recognized it as danger. It began with a conversation that was not meant to matter. They were seated in one of the smaller lounges, a space designed for comfort rather than spectacle. Soft lighting, neutral colors, furniture arranged to encourage intimacy without warmth. One of the masters, careful, controlled, always measuring, spoke idly about markets, about the instability of alliances, about how loyalty was an illusion people paid too much for. He wasn't speaking to her, not really. He was speaking to the idea of himself as a man who understood how the world truly worked. She listened. At the right moment she tilted her head and said gently, "Is that why you keep your accounts separated?" The question landed lightly, too lightly to cause alarm. It sounded like curiosity, like admiration even. He paused for a fraction of a second, not long enough for anyone else to notice. Enough for her to see the calculation flash behind his eyes. "It's prudent," he replied. "You never know who might disappoint you." She smiled. Of course. She did not ask another question. She did not push. The seed was planted. The power of it lay not in what she had learned, but in what he now believed she might know. Elsewhere in the house, tensions simmered. Two of the men had begun to avoid one another without acknowledging why. They shared history, investments, gone wrong. A partnership dissolved quietly with lawyers sworn to secrecy. In public, they were cordial. In private, they circled each other like rivals forced into the same cage. She noticed how one spoke too carefully when the other's name came up, how the other drank more on evenings when rumors of mergers reached him before confirmations did. One afternoon, she found herself seated beside the younger one, the restless one, the one who checked his phone as though it were a lifeline. He was agitated, tapping the glass of his drink with a fingernail. "You ever feel like people are setting you up?" he asked suddenly. She did not answer immediately. Silence, used properly, was an invitation. "I mean," he continued, "you think you're in control, and then suddenly everyone knows things they shouldn't, like the walls are listening." She met his eyes, letting a flicker of concern cross her face. "Are they?" He laughed, but it was sharp, humorless. "That's what scares me." Later that evening she mentioned, casually, almost absent-mindedly, to another master that the younger one seemed stressed, that he talked about being watched, that perhaps pressure was getting to him. "People crack," she said softly, "especially when they think they're alone." The master frowned. He did not like instability. Instability drew attention. From that moment the younger one was no longer just restless. He was a liability. Information moved through the house the way air did, unseen, unavoidable, shaped by architecture. She learned which staff members talked, which listened, which pretended not to hear while remembering everything. She never asked for favors. She never made demands. She simply noticed, and occasionally she understood someone out loud. That was often enough. One of the men, the one who hid behind kindness, invited her to walk the gardens with him. The estate grounds were expansive, meticulously maintained, a controlled version of nature that mirrored the house itself. As they walked, he spoke of philanthropy, of how misunderstood wealth was, of how people wanted villains when the world was more complicated than that. "We provide jobs," he said earnestly, "stability, growth." She stopped walking and looked at a statue nearby, a marble figure frozen in triumph. "Stability for whom?" she asked. He laughed, uneasy. "Everyone, eventually." "Eventually is a long time," she replied. He changed the subject. That night she overheard raised voices through the vents. Not shouting, these men did not shout, but tense, clipped exchanges, accusations wrapped in polite language, questions that sounded innocent but were anything but. Someone's name had been mentioned in the wrong context. Someone had shared something they shouldn't have. The house manager grew paler with each passing day. He began checking systems twice, then 3 times. He reassured the masters that everything was secure. that nothing leaked, that privacy was absolute. She wondered if he believed that, or if belief was simply part of his job. The eighth master, the efficient one, finally spoke to her at length. They sat across from each other in a room that felt more like an office than a living space. Screens glowed softly behind him, displaying information she could not see. "You are very observant," he said. "People are interesting," she replied. He studied her. "Interesting people are dangerous." She met his gaze without flinching. "Only to those with something to lose." A smile touched his mouth, brief and sharp. "You're clever." "So I've been told." He leaned back. "Do you know why you're here?" "Yes," she said simply. "Then you understand your position." "I understand the position you think I'm in," she corrected. For a moment the room felt smaller. The screens hummed softly. "You should be careful," he said at last. "Curiosity can be mistaken for ambition." She inclined her head. "Ambition is only a threat when it's underestimated." He dismissed her soon after. But when she left, she knew something had shifted. He no longer saw her as an asset to be managed. He saw her as a variable. Variables made people nervous. The ninth master, the one who never met her alone, made a mistake. He believed witnesses protected him. He believed that if others were present, truth would stay buried. But people listened differently when they thought responsibility was shared. During a formal dinner, with staff moving quietly around the table, he spoke too freely about a past deal. A deal that had never officially existed. He used a name he shouldn't have. He referenced a place that had been scrubbed from records. She did not react. But later, when she spoke privately to another master, she said, "It's strange how people remember things differently." "Differently how?" the man asked. She shrugged. "I suppose memory is selective." The next morning, the ninth master requested a private meeting with the house manager. By evening, he was pale, sweating, insisting on extra security. Fear, once introduced, spread quickly. The 11th master finally appeared. He arrived without ceremony, without announcement. No entourage, no display. He found her in the library, reading one of the approved books, her posture relaxed. "I've been watching you," he said. "I assumed you were," she replied, turning a page. "You don't behave like someone who believes she's owned." She closed the book. "Ownership is a story people tell themselves." He smiled faintly. "And what story do you tell yourself?" "That I'm exactly where I need to be." He studied her for a long moment. "You're enjoying this?" "No," she said honestly. "I'm using it." He laughed quietly. "You're dangerous." "Yes," she agreed. Unlike the others, he did not threaten. He did not warn. He simply nodded once and left her there, alone among the shelves. That night, the first real rupture occurred. Documents were leaked, not publicly, not yet, but internally. One master confronted another with information that could only have come from inside the house. Voices rose, accusations flew, old alliances shattered under the weight of suspicion. Who had spoken? Who had listened? Who had betrayed whom? No one thought of her. She sat in her room, listening to the echoes of conflict ripple through the estate. She allowed herself a single slow breath. This was no longer observation. This was momentum. They had believed power was loud, visible, enforced. They were learning too late that the most devastating force was quiet understanding, applied with patience. And the House of 11, once a symbol of their control, was beginning to turn inward, walls listening, secrets breathing, foundations cracking under the weight of their own arrogance. She lay back and closed her eyes. Tomorrow she would press, a little harder. The collapse did not announce itself with sirens or headlines. It began the way most true disasters did, with denial. The morning after the leaked documents surfaced internally, the house felt different. Not louder, not quieter, but sharper, as if every sound carried an edge. Footsteps paused too long outside doors. Conversations ended when someone unexpected entered a room. The staff moved with practiced neutrality, but their eyes betrayed them. Everyone could feel it now. Something was wrong, and no amount of money could smooth it away. She noticed the first sign while eating breakfast alone. The tray arrived late. It had always arrived precisely on schedule, down to the minute. Control depended on PR. Predictability. When the delay stretched to nearly half an hour, she knew it wasn't an accident. Someone had argued. Someone had countermanded an order. Authority had hesitated. When the tray finally came, it was delivered by a different attendant. A man this time, stiff-backed, his hands shaking just enough to be visible. He avoided her eyes entirely. "Everything all right?" she asked gently. He swallowed. "Of course." He left too quickly, nearly forgetting to close the door behind him. She did not touch the food. Instead, she listened. The house had a pulse now, irregular and fast. Doors opened and closed more often. Voices bled through walls despite the insulation. Somewhere in the West Wing, two men were arguing. Not heated, but precise, surgical. The kind of argument where every sentence was designed to wound without leaving evidence. By mid-morning, she was summoned. The message was polite. It always was. A request to join 3 of the masters in one of the conference rooms. No explanation, no warning. She dressed carefully, choosing simplicity over allure. Power did not need decoration today. Power needed clarity. The room they chose was the one with the long table and the screens lining one wall. It was meant for strategy sessions, not comfort. When she entered, the air felt tight, compressed by expectation. 3 men sat waiting, the careful one, the efficient one, and the man who had hidden behind kindness, a triangle of tension. "Sit," the careful one said, gesturing to a chair opposite them. She sat. "We have a problem," the kind one began, folding his hands as if in prayer. "And your name has come up." She raised her eyebrows, slightly. "In what context?" The efficient one leaned forward. "You ask questions. I listen," she corrected. "People answer." "That's not the same thing," he said. "Isn't it?" she replied calmly. The careful one interjected. "Information has been circulating, sensitive information, information that should not exist." She nodded slowly. "That sounds unsettling." "Don't play games," the efficient one snapped. "We're not fools." She met his gaze. "I never assumed you were." Silence followed, heavy, testing. The kind one sighed. "We gave you access, comfort, protection, and now we're dealing with instability." She leaned back slightly. "Instability existed before I arrived. I simply noticed it." The careful one narrowed his eyes. "Are you threatening us?" "No," she said softly. "I'm explaining cause and effect." The efficient one stood abruptly, pacing once behind his chair. "You need to understand your position." "I do," she said. "Better than you think." He stopped pacing. "Then explain how documents internal to our operations found their way into the hands of people who were never meant to see them." She looked at him thoughtfully. "Did they leave the house?" "No," he admitted. Then she said gently, "The breach is not external." The careful one slammed his hand lightly on the table. "Enough. We didn't bring you here for riddles." She leaned forward now, just slightly. "Then you shouldn't have brought me at all." That did it. The kind one flinched. The careful one stiffened. The efficient one smiled, but it was not a pleasant smile. "You forget yourself," he said. "No," she replied. "I remember myself, that's the difference." For a moment she thought they might punish her, remove privileges, confine her further, do something dramatic to reassert control. They did none of those things, because punishment required certainty, and certainty was exactly what they no longer had. "You will limit your interactions," the careful one said finally. "No private conversations, no wandering, no curiosity." She inclined her head. "As you wish." They dismissed her quickly after that, eager to regain composure. As she left the room she felt their eyes on her back, not with desire, not with confidence, but with calculation tinged with fear. They were beginning to understand. Restrictio. NS followed immediately. Escorts doubled, schedules tightened, doors that had once opened with silent efficiency now required authorization. The house manager hovered constantly, his voice brittle, his reassurances hollow, but control applied too late only revealed how fragile it had always been. The first master fell that afternoon, not literally, figuratively, completely. He was one of the quieter ones, rarely assertive, content to profit from proximity rather than dominance. He had believed discretion made him invisible. It did not. An emergency call pulled him away from the estate. When he returned hours later, his face was gray, his movements mechanical. He went straight to his wing and locked himself inside. By evening, the others knew. A regulator had opened an inquiry. Assets frozen, accounts flagged, not publicly yet, but close enough to smell the smoke. "How?" one demanded. "Who talked?" another asked. They searched for a traitor among themselves, because that was where betrayal had always lived. She heard about it second-hand, from a staff member whose hands shook as she poured tea. "They're tearing each other apart," the woman whispered. "They always do," she replied. That night, raised voices echoed through the halls long after midnight. Accusations sharpened, old grudges resurfaced. Deals once sealed with handshakes were re-examined with suspicion. One man stormed out of a meeting, slamming a door hard enough to rattle the glass. Another drank too much and spoke too freely to the wrong person. The efficient one watched it all carefully. He summoned her again, alone this time. This was a mistake. They met in a smaller room, stripped of excess. He did not offer her a seat. He did not pretend at politeness. "You orchestrated this," he said. She did not deny it. "You think you're smarter than all of us." "No," she said. "I think you're predictable." His jaw tightened. "You think ruining one of us gives you leverage." "I think you ruined yourselves long before I arrived," she replied. "I'm simply accelerating the timeline. You're playing a dangerous game." She smiled faintly. "So are you. The difference is I don't mind losing." That unsettled him more than any threat could have. "Why?" he asked suddenly. "Why do this?" She considered him for a long moment. This was the first time anyone had asked the question without arrogance. "Because power that believes itself untouchable rots," she said, "and rot spreads." "You won't walk away from this," he warned. "You don't get to destroy men like us and disappear." She stood. "You'd be surprised what disappears when people stop looking in the right places." He did not stop her from leaving. The second fall came faster. Two masters turned on each other openly, their rivalry no longer contained by manners. Lawyers were called, threats implied. A partnership dissolved overnight, billions evaporating into litigation and spite. The house became a battlefield of whispered alliances and shifting loyalties. Meetings multiplied, security tightened, paranoia bloomed, and through it all, she remained calm. She followed the new rules. She limited her movements. She spoke only when spoken to. She became invisible again, exactly when invisibility was most dangerous. At night she lay awake listening to the house unravel. She thought of her family, of names erased, of lives crushed quietly under deals signed in rooms like this one. This was not revenge driven by rage. This was correction. The kind one sought her out one evening, unannounced. He looked exhausted. His carefully maintained warmth cracked around the edges. "This has gone too far," he said. "It's only begun," she replied. "You'll destroy everything." She met his eyes. "Everything you built was already destroying others." He shook his head. "You don't understand what you're unleashing." "I understand exactly," she said. "That's why I'm not afraid." He left without another word. By the end of the week, the House of 11 no longer felt like a symbol of dominance. It felt like a trap, one they had built for themselves. One master isolated, another under investigation, two at war. One watching silently, calculating exits, and she at the center of it all untouched. The first fall had happened. The others were inevitable. And somewhere deep in the walls, beneath marble and money and fear, the foundations of their empire continued to crack, slowly, quietly, beyond repair. By the time the 5th month had passed, Alara had become an enigma in the halls of Lord Malric's estate. Those who had once seen her as a simple acquisition were beginning to sense that she was no ordinary servant or companion. Quietly, deliberately, she had learned the rhythm of the household, understanding the patterns of its masters, their schedules, and more importantly, their secrets. Information, she realized, was the true currency of influence, far more potent than gold or titles. Every whispered conversation, every subtle gesture, and every fleeting look carried meaning. It was all data to be analyzed and acted upon. Lord Malric himself remained unaware of how astutely she was observing him. To him, she appeared compliant, even deferential, her eyes lowered at the right moments, and her voice soft when she spoke. Yet Alara's mind was constantly in motion, assembling the puzzle pieces of this complex environment. She had begun to understand not just the individuals who controlled the estate, but the invisible forces that guided their decisions, the rivalries, jealousies, and hidden ambitions that could be manipulated to her advantage. The 5th month brought with it a new challenge. A delegation of wealthy traders arrived, seeking to negotiate a contract that would secure Lord Malric's influence across distant regions. The discussions were tense. Each party attempted to assert dominance through subtle threats, promises, and displays of wealth. Alara observed silently from the corner, her presence largely ignored, but she was noting every hesitation, every flicker of anxiety, and every carefully chosen word. When one of the visiting merchants made a seemingly innocuous remark about Lord Malric's rumored debts, Alara filed it away. It was a thread that could unravel the carefully maintained facade of authority if used correctly. Later that evening, after the delegation had departed, she approached Malric under the pretense of discussing the estate's accounts. She spoke softly, almost deferentially, weaving into her words insights she had gleaned about the trader's ambitions and fears. She presented options, suggestions, and strategies, each one framed as an effort to serve him rather than to assert her own influence. Yet the subtlety of her guidance began to take root. Malric, impressed by her observations and apparent loyalty, began to consult her more frequently, unwittingly granting her a foothold in decisions that affected the estate's broader political and economic maneuvers. It was not only the men who underestimated her. The household staff, too, were caught off guard by her intellect. Those who sought to undermine her, seeing her as an interloper, found their plans foiled by her anticipatory measures. She understood their motivations, their grudges, and the ways in which they sought to advance themselves at the expense of others. By acting strategically, sometimes with kindness, sometimes with feigned ignorance, she slowly turned potential adversaries into allies, or at least neutralized threats before they could gain momentum. Her growing network of quietly loyal staff became a source of intelligence that far outstripped the estate's official channels. Alara's greatest advantage, however, lay in her ability to remain underestimated. To the outside world she appeared compliant and unassuming, a reflection of what they believed they could control. Behind closed doors, however, she was constantly testing boundaries, experimenting with influence, and learning which levers could shift the balance of power. A casual comment in a conversation with one of Malric's advisors could be turned into a suggestion that seemed to originate from another source. A misinterpreted glance between two rivals could be subtly amplified to sow doubt and hesitation. Through small, calculated interventions, she began to reshape the very dynamics of the estate without ever revealing her hand. One evening she learned of a critical opportunity. Lord Malric planned to attend a high-stakes gathering of regional elites, an event where alliances would be forged and rivalries laid bare. Through her network of staff and careful observation, Alara discovered that one of Malric's closest allies harbored ambitions that conflicted with his interests. If this tension could be leveraged, it could serve to strengthen Malric's position and her influence over him. Over the following weeks, Alara orchestrated subtle interactions designed to exacerbate the rivals' insecurities while positioning Malric as the more reliable and perceptive figure. A misdirected note here, a carefully framed report there, and a strategically timed conversation ensured that each actor behaved in a predictable, manipulable way. By the time the event arrived, Malric walked into the gathering with a strengthened position, unaware that much of the groundwork had been laid by the very person he considered merely a clever servant. The culmination of her efforts came during a private moment at the gathering. Malric, having recognized the shrewdness of her insights, spoke to her candidly for the first time. "Your counsel has been invaluable," he said, not realizing that much of the credit he offered was for strategies she had subtly orchestrated, but did not claim as her own. Alara inclined her head, her expression modest, yet her mind raced with possibilities. This acknowledgement, small as it was, confirmed that her influence had reached a point where she could shape outcomes without overt confrontation. Back at the estate, Alara reflected on her progress. Each master, each staff member, each visitor had become a piece in a game she was learning to control. The 5th month had shown her that influence was not granted by position or title, but earned through observation, patience, and the skillful manipulation of perception. She realized that her role in this world was not to be seen but to see, to understand, anticipate, and quietly guide events so that her objectives could be achieved. As she prepared for the challenges that lay ahead, Alara felt a sense of quiet satisfaction. She had survived the initial months, gained the trust of those who underestimated her, and begun to manipulate the power structures around her. Yet she knew that this was only the beginning. The city was filled with others like Malric, wealthy, ambitious, and often blind to the subtle forces that could determine their fates. With patience, cunning, and a steadfast adherence to her strategy, Alara understood that she could navigate this treacherous world, not as a pawn, but as a player whose influence might shape the destinies of the very masters who believed they controlled her. The 5th month ended with the estate quieting for the night, lanterns casting shadows across polished floors and ornate tapestries. Alara stood by a window looking out at the city lights that shimmered like distant stars, each one representing a potential opportunity, a challenge, or a rival to be understood. She smiled faintly, knowing that she had begun to turn the tables, not with force but with intellect, patience, and an unerring sense of timing. In a world ruled by wealth and titles, she had discovered a different kind of power, one that could quietly topple even the most confident of masters. And with that realization, she prepared for the next phase of her journey, ready to continue her ascent in a game where knowledge, subtlety, and perception reigned supreme. The 6th month began with a shift in the atmosphere of Lord Malric's estate. Alara had grown accustomed to the rhythms of the household and the intricate patterns of influence that governed it. But even she sensed that a new challenge was emerging, one that would test not only her intellect but also her ability to navigate the unpredictable nature of human ambition. Word had reached the estate of a looming political maneuver in the city, a development that promised to reshape alliances, redistribute power, and unsettle the carefully maintained balance among the elite. For most of the masters, this was a matter to be observed with passive interest, a distant concern to be weighed only in terms of personal advantage. For Alara, however, it was an opportunity. She began by mapping out the key players involved in the forthcoming maneuver. Rival merchants whose ambitions had long been contained by tradition and fear, city officials whose allegiances were flexible and transactional, and influential nobles whose pride often blinded them to subtle threats. Each figure was more than a name. Each had habits, insecurities, and predictable reactions that could be anticipated and, if necessary, influenced. Alara's mind worked as a ledger of human behavior, assigning probabilities to each action and counteraction, always considering how her own interventions might ripple through the network of relationships surrounding the estate. One evening, as she quietly reviewed correspondence and overheard discussions in the drawing room, Alara detected the first signs of tension. A trusted advisor of Malric's had begun to advocate for an aggressive stance in the upcoming negotiations, emphasizing dominance over diplomacy. While others nodded in agreement, Alara recognized that such a strategy, though seemingly strong, carried risks. It could alienate potential allies and provoke hidden adversaries to strike in unexpected ways. Acting swiftly, she composed a series of careful observations and suggestions, presenting them to Malric under the guise of concern for the estate's reputation and security. Each point was framed as advice meant to safeguard his interests, but it also subtly guided him toward a more measured and strategic approach. Malric, ever practical and results-oriented, found himself surprisingly persuaded by Alara's reasoning. He began to consult her more regularly, asking questions that revealed both his trust and his increasing reliance on her insight. This was a delicate moment. Alara knew that she must maintain the appearance of modest counsel while subtly shaping decisions in ways that furthered her own understanding of influence within the household. Every word mattered. Every hesitation or inflection could strengthen or weaken her position. She learned quickly to anticipate not only Malric's reactions but the potential consequences of each action, weaving her guidance into the larger tapestry of the city's political landscape. Meanwhile, tensions among the household staff and secondary masters intensified. Those who had once dismissed Alara as harmless began to recognize that her presence influenced outcomes more than they had realized. Whispers circulated about her insight, her intuition, and the uncanny accuracy with which she seemed to predict conflicts before they arose. Some sought to challenge her authority, testing her knowledge and attempting to undermine her influence. Others, sensing her growing power, approached her cautiously, seeking alliances or protection. Alara navigated this delicate web with precision. She rewarded loyalty, deflected confrontation, and subtly manipulated rivalries to ensure that her position remained secure. A turning point came when the city's elite convened for a critical council meeting, a gathering meant to determine the allocation of trade rights and control over valuable resources. Lord Malric, guided in part by Alara's counsel, entered the council with a strategy that balanced assertiveness with diplomacy, projecting strength will, minimizing exposure to potential attacks. Alara had anticipated the moves of key rivals, crafting contingencies for each scenario, and providing Malric with subtle cues to exploit weaknesses without revealing the source of the intelligence. The council unfolded as she had predicted. Alliances shifted, competitors faltered under pressure, and Malric emerged with advantages that seemed, to the uninformed observer, almost fortuitous. But Alara did not stop there. She recognized that power in this city was ephemeral, contingent upon perception as much as reality. To solidify Malric's, and indirectly her own, position, she began a campaign of influence beyond the estate's walls. Discreet messages, carefully timed favors, and seemingly casual interactions allowed her to shape opinions, sow doubt among rivals, and reinforce the perception that Malric's leadership was both inevitable and wise. Each action was calibrated to maximize effect while minimizing risk, a delicate dance that required constant attention to detail and an intimate understanding of human nature. Within the estate, Alara also faced personal challenges. The months of observation and subtle maneuvering had left her with little time for rest, and the constant vigilance required to maintain her influence took its toll. Yet she recognized that endurance was as important as intellect. A single lapse could unravel months of careful planning. She developed routines to maintain focus, blending periods of quiet reflection with active engagement, ensuring that she remained sharp, attentive, and responsive to the ever-changing dynamics around her. The 6th month reached its climax with an unexpected confrontation. One of Malric's allies, emboldened by apparent success in minor maneuvers, attempted to assert control over a key decision, challenging both Malric's authority and, indirectly, Alara's influence. The move was subtle, cloaked in politeness and the pretense of concern, but Alara recognized it immediately as a calculated test. She responded not with direct confrontation but with a series of carefully orchestrated interventions, private conversations that highlighted risks, suggestions that reframed the allies' goals as aligned with Malric's broader strategy, and subtle reinforcement of Malric's confidence in his own judgment. By the time the ally realized the situation had shifted, it was too late. The challenge had been neutralized without open conflict, and the perception of Malric's unassailable position was further strengthened. In the quiet that followed, Alara reflected on her progress. She had not only survived the 6th month, but had emerged with her influence firmly established, her understanding of human nature deepened, and her capacity to shape events refined. Each master, advisor, and staff member had become a known quantity, their tendencies predictable, their ambitions legible to someone willing to observe closely and act with subtlety. She realized that true power lay not in force or wealth, but in the ability to anticipate, guide, and quietly direct outcomes without revealing the mechanisms by which they were achieved. Yet, Alara also understood that this was only the beginning. The city's political landscape was volatile, full of ambition, rivalry, and unpredictable turns. To maintain and expand her influence, she would need to continue observing, learning, and adapting, always one step ahead of those who believed themselves masters of their own fates. The lessons of the 6th month had proven that strategy, patience, and perception could outweigh brute strength, that careful calculation could transform apparent weakness into advantage, and that the subtle manipulation of information could reshape power structures in ways that were invisible to all but the most attentive observer. As the month drew to a close, Alara stood once more at the window of her quarters, gazing out at the city lights. The streets below were alive with commerce, negotiation, and the ambitions of countless individuals, each pursuing their own vision of success. She knew that among them were rivals, potential allies, and threats yet unseen, all of whom would play a part in the next chapter of her ascent. With a sense of quiet determination, she prepared for the challenges ahead, confident in her ability to navigate the intricate web of influence, to shape outcomes with subtlety and foresight, and to continue her rise in a world where perception often mattered more than reality. The 6th month had ended not with dramatic confrontation, but with the quiet consolidation of power. Alara had learned to balance observation with action, patience with intervention, and discretion with strategy. In doing so, she had transformed from a perceived asset into an essential force within the estate, her influence extending far beyond the confines of her immediate environment. And as she turned her attention to the uncertain days ahead, she knew that her journey was only beginning, that each subsequent challenge would demand greater cunning, sharper insight, and an unerring sense of timing. In the dim glow of the estate's lanterns, Alara smiled faintly, recognizing that she had begun to shape not only the fate of the household, but the destiny of those who believed themselves its masters. And with that recognition came a profound sense of purpose, to continue navigating, influencing, and mastering the intricate dance of power that defined her world, one subtle move at a time. The 7th month began with a tension that hung over Lord Malric's estate like a thick fog. Alara had grown increasingly attuned to the subtleties of influence, yet she understood that complacency could be fatal. The city itself was restless, and whispers of change circulated among the elite, carrying rumors of alliances forming and ambitions stirring in the shadows. Each day presented new variables, minor slights, shifting loyalties, and unexpected opportunities. To navigate this landscape, Alara knew she would need to refine her strategies and anticipate the unpredictable nature of those who believed themselves untouchable. The first weeks of the month were dominated by preparations for a series of political gatherings where Malric would meet influential figures from across the region. These gatherings were critical, for they offered the chance to secure trade agreements, establish alliances, and subtly assert dominance over rivals. Alara devoted herself to understanding the key personalities involved, meticulously documenting their habits, weaknesses, and desires. Every interaction, no matter how trivial it appeared to others, could be leveraged if approached with the right insight. She had come to recognize that small, almost imperceptible interventions often had the greatest impact, setting the stage for outcomes that seemed entirely natural to those around her. One evening, as she reviewed her notes, Alara realized that a long-standing rivalry between two influential merchants could be turned to her advantage. The feud had simmered for years, fueled by envy, competition, and personal grudges. Most observers would see it as an inconvenient distraction, yet Alara perceived it as an opportunity. By subtly exacerbating the tension between them, she could create a scenario where their energies were diverted, leaving them vulnerable to influence and negotiation. She began crafting a series of interactions designed to ignite just enough conflict to serve her purposes, all while maintaining plausible deniability. Alara's influence extended beyond the walls of the estate. Through carefully cultivated connections, she gathered information about upcoming decisions, secret agendas, and personal ambitions. Each piece of intelligence was analyzed, cross-referenced, and integrated into her strategies. She understood that true power was not only the ability to act, but the ability to anticipate, to foresee reactions and counteractions before they could fully materialize. This skill, honed over months of observation and subtle maneuvering, allowed her to navigate the complex web of relationships with precision. A turning point in the 7th month came when an unexpected visitor arrived at the estate, a diplomat from a neighboring city with ambitions that directly threatened Malric's influence. The diplomat was known for cunning and charm, capable of swaying even the most steadfast allies. While others in the household reacted with concern or fear, Alara saw the situation as an opportunity to demonstrate her growing mastery. She began to gather intelligence on the diplomat, noting patterns in speech, gestures, and timing. By anticipating the diplomat's tactics, she could prepare Malric to respond in ways that would maintain his advantage, and project an image of confidence and control. As the diplomatic meetings unfolded, Alara's subtle interventions proved critical. She whispered observations to Malric at opportune moments, suggested questions that exposed weaknesses, and framed discussions to highlight his strengths without revealing her hand. The diplomat, though skilled and persuasive, found themselves repeatedly countered by insights that seemed almost intuitive on Malric's part. Unseen by all, Alara orchestrated each interaction, ensuring that every move aligned with her broader strategy of influence and consolidation. Within the household, the dynamics were shifting as well. Some of the staff, now aware of Alara's growing influence, sought either to align with her or to undermine her. Alara handled these challenges with the same precision she applied to political maneuvering. She rewarded loyalty, neutralized threats with subtlety, and allowed minor conflicts to reveal hidden ambitions that she could later exploit. Her understanding of human nature had deepened to the point where even small gestures, an altered tone of voice, a fleeting look, a carefully placed suggestion, could be leveraged into significant advantage. A key moment occurred during a private confrontation with a rival within the estate. The rival, emboldened by perceived slights and misunderstandings, attempted to assert control over a critical decision. Rather than confront the challenge head-on, Alara employed patience and calculation. She allowed the rival to expose their strategy, subtly guided the discussion to reveal their limitations, and positioned herself as a mediator whose insight was indispensable. By the time the confrontation concluded, the rivals' influence had been neutralized, and Alara's reputation as an indispensable strategist had solidified further, both in the eyes of Malric and within the household. The 7th month also tested Alara's ability to balance ambition with discretion. She had to ensure that her growing influence did not attract overt suspicion or provoke backlash from those who were accustomed to unquestioned control. Each decision required careful calculation. To intervene too forcefully could reveal her capabilities, yet inaction risked losing opportunities. She developed a rhythm of engagement and observation, interspersing periods of subtle action with moments of quiet analysis. This balance allowed her to maintain a low profile while expanding her understanding of the estate, its inhabitants, and the wider political landscape. As the month progressed, Alara began to manipulate outcomes beyond the immediate sphere of the estate. Through a network of contacts, she influenced negotiations, redirected ambitions, and subtly guided the flow of information to favor Malric's position. Rivals, unaware of her involvement, acted in predictable ways that furthered her strategic goals. By the end of the month, Malric had achieved several key victories, each of which seemed to have occurred naturally, without the necessity of overt confrontation. To those outside the household, it appeared as though he had been exceptionally fortunate. To Alara, it was the result of careful planning, observation, and the artful manipulation of human behavior. In the quiet moments of reflection, Alara considered the nature of power itself. She realized that influence was not merely about controlling others, but about shaping perception, anticipating decisions, and guiding outcomes without detection. Her mastery of subtlety had reached a point where she could effect significant change while remaining largely invisible, her presence acknowledged only when convenient or necessary. This understanding gave her both confidence and caution. She knew that her ascent depended on maintaining the delicate balance between visibility and discretion, influence and anonymity. The culmination of the 7th month came during a high-profile social event, where Malric hosted numerous figures from the city and neighboring regions. Alara's preparations were meticulous. She had anticipated the interactions, the potential conflicts, and the opportunities for subtle intervention. Throughout the evening, she guided conversations, framed discussions, and orchestrated encounters that enhanced Malric's position, while revealing the ambitions and vulnerabilities of others. By the event's conclusion, Malric had secured new alliances, neutralized potential threats, and reinforced his reputation as a shrewd and capable leader, all without overtly asserting authority. As she returned to her quarters that night, Alara reflected on the 7th month's lessons. She had not only survived the challenges it presented, but had emerged with her influence expanded and her understanding of human nature deepened. The city itself, with its complex web of ambition and intrigue, had become a landscape she could navigate with skill and foresight. Each individual, from the masters to the staff, from rivals to allies, had been carefully observed, understood, and incorporated into her broader strategy of influence. Alara knew that the journey was far from over. The 8th month, she realized, would bring new challenges, more formidable adversaries, and opportunities to test the limits of her influence. Yet she faced the future with a sense of calm determination, confident in her ability to navigate the intricate dance of power, to anticipate and shape events, and to continue her ascent in a world where perception often outweighed reality. Standing once more at the window of the estate, looking out at the city bathed in the glow of lanterns, Alara allowed herself a moment of quiet satisfaction. She had transformed from a perceived asset into an indispensable force within the household, a figure whose subtle guidance shaped decisions and outcomes without overt recognition. The 7th month had demonstrated that strategy, patience, and the careful observation of human nature could create a power far greater than wealth or title alone. And with that realization came the awareness that her journey was only accelerating, that each subsequent challenge would demand greater skill, sharper insight, and unerring timing. In the shadows of the estate, Alara's influence had grown like an unseen tide, reshaping the dynamics of power and establishing her as a quiet but formidable force. As the 7th month came to a close, she felt the faint thrill of anticipation, knowing that the next stage of her journey would require all she had learned, and perhaps more. Yet she welcomed it, ready to continue her ascent, confident in the knowledge that subtlety, intellect, and foresight could accomplish what brute strength or wealth could not. The 8th month dawned with a quiet tension that seemed to hang over the entire city. Alara had long since mastered the rhythms of Lord Malric's estate and the subtleties of influence within its walls, yet she knew that the final phase of her ascent would demand her utmost attention, skill, and foresight. The city itself had shifted under her careful orchestration of alliances, rivalries, and opportunities. Competitors who had once appeared invincible were now subtly manipulated, their ambitions redirected, and their confidence undermined, all without their awareness. The stage was set for a series of decisive events that would determine the future of the estate and solidify Alara's position as a master strategist. The month began with the arrival of a powerful delegation from a distant region, representatives whose influence rivaled that of Malric himself. Their intentions were unclear, but their presence signaled that the balance of power in the city was on the verge of change. To most, the delegation represented a threat or an opportunity depending on circumstance, yet Alara saw something deeper: patterns of behavior, hidden ambitions, and subtle tensions that could be leveraged. She began by studying their habits, listening closely to their conversations, and observing every interaction with Malric and his associates. Each gesture, each carefully chosen word, was data that could be used to her advantage. Alara realized that this moment could define the culmination of months of careful work. She needed to orchestrate interactions, influence perceptions, and guide decisions in ways that would enhance Malric's position, while revealing the vulnerabilities of the delegation. She created a plan that relied not on force or intimidation, but on precision, subtle suggestions, strategic conversations, and the careful management of timing. Each move was designed to appear coincidental, natural, or even inadvertent, masking the degree of control she exerted behind the scenes. The first engagement occurred during a private council in which Malric and the delegation discussed trade agreements and regional influence. Alara had prepared meticulously, advising Malric on potential pitfalls and opportunities without revealing the full extent of her insights. As the discussion progressed, she observed the delegation's representatives reveal small cracks in their confidence, hesitation in responses, contradictions in statements, and subtle displays of envy toward Malric's apparent composure. Alara whispered suggestions at opportune moments, steering the conversation in directions that strengthened Malric's position while exposing the delegation's vulnerabilities. By the end of the meeting, Malric had secured concessions that seemed almost accidental, while the delegation left uncertain, frustrated, and off balance. Within the estate, Alara continued to consolidate her influence. Staff members who had once been indifferent or suspicious of her now recognized her as indispensable. Those who attempted to undermine her found their efforts quietly neutralized through careful planning and subtle interventions. She'd learned to manipulate not just decisions and events but perceptions, ensuring that each action reinforced her reputation as a discreet, insightful, and loyal advisor. Her mastery of subtlety allowed her to act decisively while remaining largely invisible, a force that shaped outcomes without attracting undue attention. The most critical challenge of the 8th month came during a public gathering, where multiple masters, influential merchants, and political figures assembled to witness the formal announcement of trade allocations and new regional alliances. Alara had anticipated that rival factions would attempt to assert dominance, disrupt proceedings, or manipulate outcomes for personal gain. She had prepared contingencies for every likely scenario, creating a web of subtle influence that ensured Malric's position would be strengthened regardless of the specific actions taken by others. During the event, Alara worked behind the scenes, guiding conversations, framing discussions, and subtly redirecting attention. A minor misunderstanding between two ambitious merchants, which could have escalated into conflict, was carefully amplified at a critical moment, drawing attention away from Malric while forcing rivals to focus on each other's weaknesses. A whispered suggestion at the right time, a prominent noble to publicly support Malric's position, further reinforcing his authority. By the end of the evening, Malric had achieved multiple strategic victories, none of which could be directly attributed to him, and none of which revealed the true architect behind them. In the quiet that followed, Alara reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. She remembered the first day at the estate, when she had been perceived as merely an acquisition, a resource to be used and controlled. Over the months she had observed, learned, and acted with patience, subtlety, and precision. She had turned vulnerability into opportunity, understanding that influence could be far more potent than wealth or brute strength. Every master, every staff member, every rival had become a piece in a game that she now controlled with remarkable skill. Yet even with her accomplishments, Alara understood that power was never permanent. The 8th month had demonstrated both her abilities and the fragility of influence. She knew that maintaining control required vigilance, adaptability, and a continual assessment of human behavior. Those who had been allies could become threats, those underestimated could reveal unexpected capabilities, and circumstances could shift in ways that demanded immediate action. Alara accepted this reality, confident in her ability to navigate complexity and uncertainty with foresight and intelligence. The climax of the month, and of her long campaign, came with a decisive confrontation. A coalition of masters, who had long perceived Malric as vulnerable, attempted to assert dominance by orchestrating a challenge to his authority in both trade and influence. The confrontation was subtle, cloaked in diplomacy, politeness, and tradition, yet its stakes were immense. Failure could have undone months of careful work, eroding trust, authority, and perception simultaneously. Alara approached this challenge as she had every other. Through meticulous preparation, observation, and strategic intervention, she anticipated the coalition's moves, guided Malric's responses, and subtly influenced key players to act in ways that aligned with her objectives. Each interaction was orchestrated to appear spontaneous, natural, or coincidental, while actually being a carefully constructed sequence of events designed to ensure Malric's advantage. The coalition, unaware of the unseen hand directing outcomes, found their plans unraveling, their alliances fraying, and their confidence undermined. By the end of the confrontation, Malric emerged not only unscathed but strengthened, his authority and influence solidified, while the coalition retreated, confused and diminished. In the aftermath, Alara's influence reached its zenith. She had navigated months of intrigue, observation, and manipulation to achieve results that seemed miraculous to all but the most discerning observer. Malric, while grateful for her counsel, remained largely unaware of the full extent of her orchestration. Those around her acknowledged her insight, her intelligence, and her subtlety, yet none could fully perceive the breadth of her control. Alara had become a force whose presence shaped outcomes without demanding recognition, a strategist whose power lay in subtlety, foresight, and the mastery of human behavior. As the 8th month drew to a close, Alara stood once more at the window of her quarters, gazing out at the city that stretched beneath the night sky. Lanterns glimmered like stars, each representing ambition, desire, rivalry, or opportunity. She understood that the city was a living, shifting web of influence, one that could be navigated, directed, and shaped by those with skill, patience, and insight. She had demonstrated that perception, intelligence, and subtlety could surpass wealth, title, or brute force, and she had proven her ability to act decisively without revealing the mechanisms of her power. In that quiet moment, Alara reflected on the Joe. Ernie, from the first day she had arrived at the estate to the culmination of her 8th month, she had transformed from an underestimated newcomer into a masterful strategist, a quiet force whose influence extended far beyond the walls of the household. The lessons of observation, patience, and subtle intervention had been tested and proven, and she had emerged stronger, wiser, and more capable than ever before. Yet even as she acknowledged her accomplishments, Alara remained aware of the fragility of power. The city's landscape was ever-changing, and the ambitions of others continued to evolve. The final lesson of the 8th month, perhaps the most important of all, was that mastery of influence required constant vigilance, adaptability, and a deep understanding of human nature. She had learned to guide outcomes, anticipate behavior, and shape perception, but she knew that the game of power never ended. Each victory was temporary, each achievement a step toward new challenges, and each success an opportunity to refine strategy further. The 8th month ended not with fanfare or celebration, but with a quiet sense of accomplishment and anticipation. Alara had woven a complex tapestry of influence, subtly manipulating events and individuals to achieve results that seemed almost miraculous to all but herself. She had transformed the estate, strengthened Malric's position, and demonstrated the extraordinary power of observation, strategy, and subtle action. And as she prepared for the future, she did so with confidence, knowing that the skills she had honed over 8 months had made her not only indispensable but formidable. In the stillness of the night, Alara allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. She had turned perception into power, patience into advantage, and subtlety into dominance. The journey had been long, fraught with challenges, and requiring constant vigilance. Yet she had proven that true influence could be achieved without force, that intelligence and foresight could shape destinies, and that a quiet, observant mind could wield power far beyond what others imagined. The city, the estate, and the network of masters and rivals were hers to navigate, and she faced the future with the calm certainty of one who understood the intricate art of influence and the enduring value of strategic mastery. The 8th month closed, marking not an end, but a culmination of Alara's ascent from underestimated newcomer to subtle architect of outcomes. Her journey had been defined by observation, strategy, patience, and the careful orchestration of human behavior, and she had emerged victorious, not through force or wealth, but through the quiet mastery of perception, timing, and insight. And in that mastery, she recognized her true power, the ability to shape events, influence outcomes, and navigate a world of ambition and intrigue with a skill that few could match.